I'm a cessationist except in extraordinary conditions. Do I believe that God can work through tongues and, through like words that are prophetic? Sure. But like, do I believe that there are prophets that are telling the future and that are, like going to say things that are speaking the name of God? No, I don't, because I think that the Bible was completed with revelation.
What's up, citizens? I'm John, and welcome to City Square Podcast, where we talk to everyday people about faith and work. If you enjoy our content, please don't forget to subscribe, like this video, click the bell, and if you would, leave us a comment and any kind of questions you might have. Just, like I said, drop us a comments. Those things help us with the channel, helps us grow the channel, and like kind of lets us know if y'all are enjoying what we're doing. But today, I'm with Lee Wright. He's the college minister of the Reformed University Fellowship at UTSA, University of Texas at San Antonio. What's going on, man?
Hey, man. How are you doing?
Doing great.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for inviting me into your backyard. I hope everybody can enjoy the nice fencing that we have behind us and just the fact that we're getting to enjoy some fresh air.
I know, man. This is the first time that I've ever recorded one of these like in person. We're usually on Zoom or Riverside, and so I'm actually kind of excited to be able to do this in person, man. But how's the cigar?
It's quite nice. I enjoy cigars, and John has been a great discipler of cigars for me, and so I have enjoyed his presence and his wisdom in this. So thank you, John.
Like, we first met, was it about a year ago? At Starbucks?
Ooh, probably. When did you move here?
It's been, I think in March, it'll be 18 months.
Okay. Yeah. We met shortly after you moved here, I believe. Yeah. So I think it was sometime in the fall of 2021. That's the time that we met. So
it's been good since then, man.
Yeah.
So I've heard it before, but a pretty good chunk of the people who are going to be watching this or listening to this later haven't. Would you mind sharing some of your stories, some of your testimony?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am from North Texas, in a small town called Granbury. Born and raised there. If you know much about the town or know much about North Texas, a lot of places are pretty Christian-y, and I think my identity would have even been as a good Christian kid, just like most people that I had grown up with. So was raised in that kind of like Baptist-y culture. So interestingly enough, as part of my life story is that I was baptized as an infant in a Presbyterian church in Alabama, but then I was raised in this Baptist-y culture, made a profession of faith at a very young age, about 6 years old. I remember the day, the time, all of that. But then also for many years of my life, definitely struggled with assurance of faith and if I was doing things the right way. So like many people who grow up in that kind of culture, felt like I needed to pray a Lord's Prayer in order to confess my sin, pray a sinner's prayer, and confess my sin and, receive Jesus. And I realize now in hindsight that it was my way of dealing with conviction and dealing with just the pain of guilt and shame. And then whenever I felt like I needed Jesus. And it wasn't until college where I was praying that prayer on a weekly, almost a daily basis, that I realized there needs to be something else. And so I was an athlete, and I had a track teammate who had just encouraged me that there's something called assurance of faith, and that if I'm one of Christ, then there's no turning back. And so that, there's once and for all justification. Anyway, she didn't get into all of that, but that was a big part of what was really freeing for me to realize that I didn't have to earn my salvation in any way, like even with a prayer. And so I went to a Baptist college in Alabama called Samford University. It was a very instrumental, informative time of my life. That's part of the reason why I'm a college minister, is because I just love the college life. in the college years. And so from 18 to 22, I, played sports, continued on that trajectory, but then also was planning on being a physician. And so I did a pre-med degree. And at the end of my college years, really in one summer, the Lord just confirmed the desire, really kind of implanted, confirmed, and then delivered on a desire for me to do full-time ministry. And so that was a huge change. And then the next year I ended up going to seminary in St. Louis, Missouri. I ended up meeting my wife there. I heard about RUF in college, but I was never involved with it. And my wife, when we had met, she had just come off of the field of doing a 2-year-long internship with RUF. And so the short version of the story is that she really taught me and helped me appreciate more about RUF. And we're now serving together at the University of Texas at San Antonio. This is my 9th year of doing campus ministry. I did 6 years at the University of Central Florida, and this is my 3rd year at UTSA in San Antonio. And I'm an ordained minister in the PCA, which stands for Presbyterian Church in America. So we can get into that a little bit.
Yeah, man, definitely.
Yep.
So, when you were in seminary, you studied counseling, right?
Yeah, so I did a master's of divinity and a master's of counseling.
So, you studied medicine, you studied theology, you studied counseling. So, you've studied, everything. You've kind of...
I was a math major at one point. I've studied a lot of different things. That's for sure. Yep.
Not only you studied God, but you also studied the entire person.
That makes me sound a lot smarter than I actually am. So yeah, that's funny.
So I assume this was probably something you had to wrestle with, right? So you were basically born into your family is, I assume, is Presbyterian, at least in the beginning, because you were baptized as a baby.
Yeah. I mean, that's a long, very drawn out story, but part of my family is Presbyterian.
Gotcha.
The mom side of my family, my dad's side of the family is Presbyterian now, but okay. So it was in many ways, and that's what is interesting about this is that I was raised Presbyterian, but also in the sense that baptism was told to me as though it was a christening. Okay. And that I needed to be baptized later on, which is definitely not typical for Presbyterians. So yeah, I mean, I practiced my children have been were baptized as babies, and that's a big part of our family story, my family. But in some ways, I was confused as a child, what was that thing that happened whenever I was little? Yeah,
it's that's what I was gonna get to, is because you said you ended up growing up in the Baptist church,
mm-hmm.
And I think I'm assuming, which may be a mistake, that more people are more familiar maybe with the Baptist understanding of baptism, at mm-hmm. least that probably watch this maybe.
Sure.
And so was there a wrestle with understanding your baptism, going from Presbyterian to Baptist to back to Presbyterian, and did that first baptism definitely. Count, and
definitely.
What was it like to work through that?
Definitely. So I was rebaptized. Well, it was actually told to me that I was baptized for the first time, but then I realized that I was rebaptized. I was baptized at the Baptist church my senior year of high school. And yeah, I mean, I was kind of told this is what baptism is. I remember also a youth person at the Baptist church I went to who had told me to beware of Calvinists, because they were coming to college campuses, and that they could even be in Baptist college campuses. And so I obviously didn't take that to heart, because
I know what kind of Baptist church that is.
So but yeah, it was very interesting because, when you grow up in a small town, there are just so many influences and so many voices you hear, especially when you're a kid. And so, religiously, theologically, for the longest time, I had an extremely narrow, view of like who God was. And honestly, I didn't even know that much either.
Yeah.
So, I would, and again, like to go back to it, like I was an athlete, I was a jock. I didn't really care about that stuff. Like being a pre-med major meant that I was even joking with somebody about this earlier, but seriously, I didn't read a book in college. And then now I read like a couple of books a month, you know? So it's like, it was a complete change and a complete turnaround.
That's awesome, man.
Mm-hmm.
I'm impressed that you got through college without reading a book. There's a joke that like if you're smart enough, you can get through life without working. So you had mentioned like you were wrestling like with a lot of guilt. I think it was probably when you were in high school, right?
High school and college.
High school and college.
Yeah.
And so like, how did you get like? Can you explain like how you kind of got freed from that?
Yeah. So one part was just like having a good friend. So it really began like my senior year of high school, having a good friend who was on my soccer team who really in many ways like imitated who Jesus was in his kindness. The experiences that I had with like people in youth group, people who called themselves Christian, was that they were two-faced and they were hypocritical, or they were really stuck up. And so I just didn't really want anything to do with that like culture, either three of those cultures, I guess. And so, but I really found just a lot of joy in like being around this guy. And so he would do like Bible studies on my soccer team, and I was like, man, this is like, I want to learn from him. I want to know about like more about Jesus. And so that it was part of it. And then also being in college and being at mandatory chapels and, you know, being around a lot of Christians where there was just a lot of conversation about Jesus in very real ways. And yeah, the Spirit was just, convicting me of my sin and also just like some of the wrestlings that I had.
Yeah. So like, I tend to think of it like of people, I guess, in kind of like two different ways. Because like there's no perfect people, right? There's no perfect people. There's no perfect church and that kind of thing. And so there tends to be people who are not perfect, who are sinners, who don't care. Mm-hmm. And then there's people who have the self-awareness, but they don't want to stay where they're at. Mm-hmm. And they want to pursue Christ, and they mm-hmm. want to grow in their faith, and they don't want to sin anymore, and they actually want to grow and mature. Mm-hmm. And they're both people are sinners, not perfect, but one of them is like, I don't care, I'm not the problem, somebody else is. And it's like, I am a problem, and I don't want to be any longer. And it sounds like you started to become maybe around some more of those people, and had like the healthy community, the healthy local body, who that y'all were able to like sharpen each other, and you were ended up being freed from. They helped you be freed from what you were wrestling with. Yeah,
that's a great definition. And you know what's interesting is I was on a cross country team at Sanford at the college, and we had 13 guys on this team. And you know, as I look back on it, it was the fall that I spent with those guys from, you know, mid-August to like, let's say late November. And we like that was a very, very formative time for me, but it also was like this time where we bonded together really quickly. And I think it speaks to the necessity of community, but also just how like gluey, like real, like beautiful Christian community can be. Like there's a better word for it than gluey, but you know, like there's like this
contagious,
contagious, but also it just like made you want to be together and made you want to like invest in each other. And you know, I was just going through like Ecclesiastes 4 with students last night and thinking about like friendship and thinking about like just how good it's, you know, two are better than one, and you know, a threefold cord is not easily broken. And just that whole idea can be done in small places and can be done in small community, and it can be really, really rich there too. So
awesome, man.
Yeah,
I know, like, because I've been a part of like a bunch of like, I guess, different churches, and I've seen like the stories, the horror stories you hear about all the time. And then I've also been a part of churches that where I'm like, I wish everybody could experience what I'm experiencing. Because then, I think the church, at least in the America, because that's where my experience is.
Yeah.
Not so much would have a better reputation, but our people, the body of Christ, I want them to be able to experience these things that I've experienced, the good things I'm experiencing.
Yeah.
The body believers rallying around each other, supporting each other, praying together, eating together, laughing together, crying together, seeing needs, and then actually meeting them, discipling each other. I mean, reading the word together, all that stuff is phenomenal. And I'm like, I wish Christians, that was normal for all Christians. But unfortunately, that's quite often more than not, that's not always the case.
Yeah.
So how did you end up coming back? Go ahead, man.
Oh, I was going to say, and I think one thing too, one of the problems about going to seminary, and maybe you would agree with this, at least in principle, is that you get this very narrow idea of what you think a church should be.
Yeah.
And so it's really hard to be happy in churches, especially if you're not the one leading and dictating everything. Yeah. And that's always a challenge in my role, because my family is a member at a church. I'm actually not a member there, because that's one of the funky things about Presbyterianism, is that we're a member of Presbytery, but not a church. And yet we are content in that place and we stay there. Real quick, I'll tell you the story. So lived in Orlando for 6 years, not an easy time. It was a very challenging, we really felt alone in Orlando. But one of the things is that our church, even though it was very imperfect and there were some challenges at the time, they loved us really, really well. Yeah. We left in 2020 during the middle of the pandemic, and this is a beautiful church, and typically they would have just had this big celebration for us, but it was lockdown essentially. So we just kind of left in the wind, and we went back a couple weeks ago for a wedding in Orlando, and it was amazing to see how many people had seen us for the first time in almost 3 years. Yeah. And we're just openly embracing us. And it would be very easy for me to sit here and knock off all of the ways that they're imperfect, and that they aren't living out the Great Commission, blah, 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 blah. But there's just something beautiful about a church who really embraces people. Right. And so I am more content with less, I would say, because of that experience, but also just really grateful that there are churches where you can be loved. And one of the cool things about my role is that I don't have Sunday. I don't have an official role on Sunday, so I get to preach out at a lot of different churches. So we can talk about that later. But I've definitely seen a broad landscape of Presbyterian and Reformed churches, and it's been really cool. It's been humbling to see that too.
No, dude, I look forward to getting to that here in a little bit.
Yeah.
So I guess in a sense, man, how did you get back to your roots?
Presbyterian roots? Is that okay? So when I went to college in Birmingham, I lived with my grandparents. That was one of the ways I could afford going to Stanford. And they were members, essentially founding members at Briarwood Presbyterian, which is one of, if not the largest church in the PCA. And I just kind of went there with them. And so it was an easy way to go there. I remember there was one Sunday where the pastor was like, okay, I'm preaching on predestination this week. And that was one of the words that I heard that I just need to stay away from. And I was like, oh man, this is not going to be good. And it ended up really challenging me. And I was really grateful that that's how God functions with his plan. And so, it took a little while, and there were, as a college student, I'm sure you may have been like this to some extent. You kind of fish around at different things, but I just kept going back to that church. And so that's essentially the story. And then I ended up going to the denominational seminary of the PCA, Covenant Seminary, because I felt like I needed to know enough about what the PCA believes in Presbyterianism. So I wanted to make sure to be taught by people who were Presbyterian. And yeah, I mean, there was even as late as like my first year of seminary, I was, debating like, what do I think about baptism? And kind of landed on covenant baptism or, paedo baptism, infant baptism, as, what I believed in. So.
Gotcha, man.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
So how did, I think it's fascinating that the pastor would have to announce he's talking about predestination at a PCA church. I think that's interesting. I can see that being necessary, like a common thing in a Baptist church or like a non-denominational church. But like, that's kind of like a key thing within a PCA church is this predestination. And so like, but how did you come from, I guess, dreading or viewing predestination as a cuss word, I guess, to like studying it, understanding it, and I guess not just embracing it, but like loving it?
Yeah. That's a good question. I think it's, it depends on how long you want to go back on the story, but because I think that there was a time where I was a cage stage where I was like, if you're, if you don't believe in tulip, like, how dare you even step foot in a church, to the point of really understanding that like predestination is so much a part of like the foundation of what like the Reformed beliefs and even like Westminster Confession is like based on. And so it's just kind of like an underlying, assumption is probably not the right word, but it really is kind of the foundation of which everything is built on. I think that the context of that church in Birmingham was that there were a lot of people who, in practice, were Baptists. And so, I think that is why it was like announced that way. And I think it was probably helpful because there was more than just one person in there that would have been like, oh, predestination, so anyway, so I think that's kind of like where that went. And then as I began to understand what predestination really was, I really began to study like who God is, and I began to see God less as like, if predestination is true, then it's not just him trying to be some kind of like meanie, but really him having like a loving heart. And as a father, this is part of his provision for me.
Yeah.
And provision for the world and creation and, all that. So,
nice,
yeah.
Meanie is such a nicer word than what I've heard some other people say. I remember when I was saved when I was 18, freshman in college, and I didn't know what predestination meant. Mm-hmm. Like, didn't know what that meant, didn't know what election meant, didn't know what almost anything meant.
Yeah.
I think I was about a year into my faith before I was able to like say, okay, I believe in like the Trinity. Mm-hmm. But like one of the first questions I had was about like freedom versus God's control. Mm-hmm. Like, what are my choices? What is my freedom? If God's in control, then why do I have these choices? Why do I have these decisions? Because like people always say like, oh, don't worry about God's control. Like every almost all Christians say that.
Yeah.
But if you ask them to break that down, they get pissy. Mm-hmm. And so I remember going to like a college retreat in Fort Worth, and the bus asking lads like, how do I have these choices or free will? Mm-hmm. And like God is in control. And people nearly threw up because they're like, somebody said like, I don't know how you could even have the audacity to ask such a question. Mm. And like, I'm like maybe a couple months into the faith. Yeah. And I was like, all right, fine. Mm-hmm. Like, that's fine. We won't talk about that stuff.
Yeah.
Like, y'all are the only people I've got to talk about it with. And if I can't talk about it with y'all, then I guess I'm not going to talk about it. Mm-hmm. But it wasn't until a couple years later till I actually started getting discipled by somebody that they were excited that there's somebody who like was willing to talk about those things, wanted like to flesh out their theology and that kind of thing, man. Mm-hmm. And so I want to have enough self-awareness that I think I went through a cage stage era. I'm pretty sure I did. I'm just blind to it.
Yeah.
Because a lot of like I kept wanting to like have these conversations, debates, and as I made new friends and who were excited about their faith and wanted to reach the campus, that kind of thing, a lot of them don't want to talk about it with me.
Yeah.
So I was like, I was probably part of the problem there. But like for me, and probably I assume you as well, like there's a lot of like there's hope in knowing that God has chosen and elected us. Because if He doesn't, like we're kind of screwed because we're not going to do it. It's not without him intervening on our behalf. And like I like how like Matthew Henry says like God made us believe. And I'm like, I got peace in that.
Yeah.
I got a lot of peace in that because like I know like my flesh is like wants to like run the other direction.
Yeah. Absolutely.
But God just grabbed me and pulled me towards Him. And I'm like, that's good news. And like I'm thankful that I'm not in control of this.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it's I would say that I lean more into like reading the Bible and trying to understand the Bible on its own terms and theologically, you know, trying to understand it like by using terminology. I think one of the things that especially like cage stage Calvinists get like in trouble with is that they try to like insist that their theology fits into the Bible rather than the other way around. And so, you know, I mean, and I have to lean into like mystery as a, you know, part of like just not understanding the will of God and not understanding like every particular thing. And even like I internally hesitated when saying like, and I began to know more about God. And I was just thinking like, I wasn't even like really understanding it. I was just understanding like small parts of theology, but that's like a really key part, I think, of just having like, you know, Christian and theological humility is to say like, and there was a professor that was very influential for me in seminary who would say that one of the best answers that you can give people is I don't know.
Yeah.
In part because you don't want them to follow you. You want them to follow Jesus, but also you have like, it models some humility to say like, yes, I've studied this stuff and it's complicated and, or it's just like, not like, it's not perfectly known for us to answer that question. So
well, like when you're like sitting at the table, like with college students who, a lot of them are probably new to the faith. Even the ones who probably aren't new, probably didn't read the Bible growing up.
Correct.
I've never met your students. I'm just going based off of like, I feel like I know the culture well enough.
Oh yeah. No, you're hitting it on the head.
So like when you studied like apparently everything. And when you can say, I don't know, then like, well, like, wow, like even he doesn't know. So like, it's okay to not, the mystery of God is like, it's an okay thing to have. And same thing with like with pastors who have 12 PhDs, written 39 books in 6 months. When they can say like, I don't know, they're like, okay, wow, God is that big. And like in the West, man, we have a hard time with I don't know. We like to have the answers for everything. We've had a lot of answers for a lot of stuff. And we have a tendency to have the struggle with God, there being a mystery of God. Which I think the first believers did better with than we did. And like, even like, I have a hard time with I don't know, man. Like, I don't like not knowing things. And it's a wrestle for me to be okay, like with the mystery at times.
Sure.
At the same
I am a know-it-all. I do want to make that clarify. Like, I want you to know that I love to have answers. I love to be able to, I mean, it's actually really sweet to be able to have a conversation with a student, to be able to explain to them, like, for instance, I was able to explain double imputation to students yesterday, one of whom had never heard of that before.
Can you break that down?
So the idea of Jesus taking on our sin and him giving his righteousness to us. And one student who had just become a believer had never heard that. He only thought that that Jesus took on our sin. And so he was freed of that. And so he was thankful of it. And he had never heard that like Jesus' righteousness is given to us. And so that idea was amazing. Like in many ways he lit up. And so it was exciting and it's really fun to do that. And my pride loves it too. But I think that like my call on campus is not to do that all the time. And if that is my call on campus, I probably need to leave. Because I will make it all about me.
Yeah.
And I will make it all about following me instead of following Jesus.
Yeah, I definitely don't want to I don't want to take anything away from the importance of teaching, for sure.
Oh yeah. Definitely.
Man, there was something else I wanted to go back to, but we missed it. But you want to share a little bit about what the Westminster Confession is?
Yeah. So it's a document that was written in the 1640s. And it's the document that is like the standards by which the PCA has it's like theological standards. So the Westminster Confession for us, I would say is definitely not equal to the Bible. I think that's the first thing that I make sure to help students understand, because they're the ones that are most prone, in my opinion, in my experience, to want to make that everything. So they're not equal to the Bible, but they're a helpful guide. They're good guardrails for us to understand theologically, what we believe, what is essentially what is Reformed theology, and it's particular for Presbyterian beliefs. So as a PCA minister, and by the way, do you want me to explain what the PCA is too? Because I realize that we're in Texas and there's probably not a lot of people who know what PCA is.
I think there's 12 PCA churches in Texas. I thought about that earlier, but I was like, I don't want to feel like we have to define everything.
That's okay.
But I mean, since you mentioned it, it's probably a good idea.
I always define everything because I always assume that no one knows anything. So the PCA is Presbyterian Church in America. Just notice Tim Keller's denomination. I absolutely love Tim Keller, or R.C. Sproul, if you like R.C. Sproul. I got to meet him right before he passed away when I was in Florida. It is a very small denomination. I think that's something to be said. It's a really powerful one, though, man. Yeah, I bet you there are more Baptists in South Texas than there are Presbyterians in the United States, PCA Presbyterians. We have about 360,000 PCA members. So it's tiny compared to how big the U.S. is, how big the SBC is. But in terms of Presbyterians are generally more educated, are generally writing a lot, are generally involved with a lot of conversations, debates. Anyway, so there is, you're right in saying that they're influential. But in the scope of Christianity in the U.S. in particular, we're small. And so that's the denomination that I come from. I've had a lot of really interesting conversations about this. I'll add this to, I'm Presbyterian because that's the family, that's the crazy family that I chose to belong with, and that I still belong to. But because I went to a Southern Baptist church, I actually have a lot of Baptist friends. I connected with John because he reached out to me. He failed to mention this on Messenger randomly, and we connected that way. And so I met this stranger at this coffee shop, and he didn't even have a clear picture on his Facebook profile, so I had no idea what he really was going to look like. And yeah, so I really in practicing Christianity, I really want to be ecumenical in my practice, in the sense that I want to believe that Jesus works past the PCA, and even Reformed, Reformed people. And so I have pretty broad friendships, and even I try to read pretty broadly too. I try to read Christians who are in churches, but I also, I know people in a lot of different denominations who I really respect and really value their thoughts, and we would differ in a lot of different ways, pretty broadly. But in one practice was that I was part of an Ash Wednesday service with the Episcopal group on campus at UCF whenever I was there in Florida. And it was actually a really cool and really beautiful service. The details of which at times I was like nervous about because I didn't understand it, but looking at it from like a 30,000 foot view, I could definitely appreciate and say like Jesus was glorified in this. And so, so that was really cool and really helpful. So
nice, man.
Yeah. Anyway, went off on a rabbit trail there, but
no, that's cool. Like I haven't had a choice throughout most of like my Christian life and my life, like church planning and pastoring. I haven't had a choice but to exist ecumenically.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, because like where I was, there wasn't any other like really like Reformed churches.
Yeah.
And like Reformed in itself is kind of an ecumenical term.
Mm-hmm.
And so, but like there wasn't a PCA church where I was church planning at. There wasn't a Reformed Baptist church. There wasn't anything like that. There was a lot of evangelical churches.
Mm-hmm.
And so like I have no choice but to focus on like the course of essentials, like the Apostles' Creed.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Like I was like, okay, we've got common ground there. Then like let's exist together and let's watch God do things that He does.
Yep.
And so like that's been kind of like what I've kind of have had to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so like, but like there's like you were saying, man, there's a lot of beauty in that.
Yeah.
And like you've got me connected to a couple people here in San Antonio. Mm-hmm. And I've gotten to have lunches with people from different traditions and backgrounds, and we've been able to come together and celebrate things that God is doing.
Yeah,
and that's fantastic.
Yeah,
it's nice to like, I guess, to have a tribe that you can get together with and focus on like the more like secondary doctrines that you hold dear and enjoy those things together.
Yep.
But there's also value in like getting within the broader umbrella and celebrating things together as well.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
Like. A lot of people are going to be really confused in heaven with who they're going to be sitting at the table with.
Yeah. I think, and this is something that's like coming to South Texas has been really good and convicting for me. I've begun to like learn about like Pentecostalism in South Texas. And at first I was completely skeptical of it because I just had like very strong lines of like what was true and what was like the gospel essentially. And as I've learned more about it and as I've met more people and as I've talked about it, I have honestly had to be humbled and say like, God is doing something here. For instance, the largest ministry at UTSA's campus by a long shot is the Pentecostal ministry.
Yeah.
And in meeting a number of those students, I don't say like that person's definitely not a Christian, right. And so there's something that's happening there. And I think it was actually Tim Keller. He's come and spoken at like RUF trainings before. And he was the first person that I had ever heard of say, we need to see what's happening in the Pentecostal church, pray for it. And in some way, like learn from it, but also just like witness how God is at work there. And that was really humbling to hear from an insanely smart guy and from a guy who has devoted his entire life to being in the PCA as well. And a cessationist, to throw out another term for the podcast today. But, so anyway, I really do think that there is like a humility that Jesus calls us to. That we'll continue to learn in our life.
What is the cessationism?
Cessationism is the gosh, I'm not going to be able to define it really like perfectly. I shouldn't have even said it. It is
it's people that don't believe that God works miraculously anymore, right?
Essentially, yeah, that there's...
I was joking.
Thank you for tripping me up on my own words. That the gifts of the Spirit, that there are gifts which have ceased to exist.
And they ceased with the apostles.
Past the apostles, yes.
And those would be like speaking in tongues, miraculous healings...
Yes, for the sake of worship. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, because we could say that we're speaking in tongues if you say something to me in Spanish.
Would you say there's a misunderstanding about what that word means?
Cessationism or tongues?
Yes. Geez, man. cessationism.
Yes, because I think that the assumption is that these are people who don't believe that Jesus does miraculous things, and that he is, and that we just need to be really educated in our Christianity. And I also think that also bleeds into this idea that like that the Christians that are cessationists are also not looking for God to work in miraculous ways. And I'm longing for him to work in miraculous ways. If he converts one person through RUF this semester, that's miraculous.
So that's kind of why I always have an issue with the term miraculous.
Yeah.
Like, well, God, the miraculous gifts don't exist anymore.
Yeah, that's right.
Anymore. I always have an issue when people say that, when people use that word, because to me that's a broad thing. Like, I think my salvation is a miracle.
Absolutely.
I think my sanctification is a miracle.
Yeah.
I think when like I am more, with the moments that I am just a tiny bit more concerned about the edification of the body than myself, that's a miracle.
Yeah.
Or more concerned about a lost person, like that's a miracle. And whenever I show hints of like generosity and fruits of the Spirit, I think those are miraculous things that the Spirit is doing.
Yeah.
And so I always have an issue when people use that term very close knit to just mean a couple of gifts. Yeah.
No, that's true. That's a good response.
So you're a cessationist?
In the sense of that's the way that I would believe.
Do you have to be one to be PCA?
Yes. Okay. I mean, you would have to like majorly explain, and so I will say this.
Have to probably wasn't a fair way to put it.
Yeah. I'm a cessationist except in extraordinary conditions. Do I believe that God can work through tongues and, through like words that are prophetic? Sure. But like, do I believe that there are prophets that are telling the future and that are, like going to say things that are speaking the name of God? No, I don't, because I think that the Bible was completed with revelation.
Gotcha. All right. Mm-hmm. So I think we got enough to rabbit trail. So I want to back up for just a minute, unless you're done with this. Westminster Confession. Should people read it?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think I'm going to caveat that. Yes, and or.
Okay.
If you want to have a good understanding of, like, these are kind of like the blanket beliefs of Reformed Christians, because I even think like Reformed Baptists would not 100% agree with it, but agree with a lot of it. It's a great document.
I would hope so, man.
Yeah, it's a great document. If you want a better document for devotional purposes, I would go to the Heidelberg Catechism. The Heidelberg Catechism is actually something I'm doing, helping my church with. Now I'm bringing in more definitions.
You opened the can, man. You said you like to define everything.
That's right. I do. Well, it's all my education, right? So the Heidelberg Catechism, I honestly didn't know that much about it until I was in seminary, but it is significantly more devotional. Yeah. I mean, the first question, what is your only comfort in life and in death? Like, there are no questions. There's nothing that's that emotionally gripping and as beautiful in its words as inside the Westminster Confession. And so as a document, the Westminster Confession is really great. As a devotional tool, reading something like the Heidelberg Catechism, like, just makes your heart want to jump. And so, I mean, I'm helping take our church through that.
Nice, man.
So, yeah. And it's actually an older document too. It was written in the 1500s. So
you would say the Heidelberg is probably more, go to that first before the Westminster.
It depends on who you are. Yeah. So if you're the guy who, likes reading John Owen, likes reading, like, really getting into, some thick theology, go to the Westminster Confession. But if you're if you're more, I hate to say more devotionally driven, but especially like for like a secular person, like if, you know, if I have a student come to faith, they really want to know more about theology, I'm going to send them to Heidelberg before I'm going to send them to Westminster. But Westminster is like, it lays out a ton of like really, really good information. It's extremely thorough. So it gives you a very thorough understanding of the good news of the gospel, of like a more Presbyterian, more Reformed understanding of theology.
Okay.
So,
all right,
yeah. Have you ever read the Heidelberg Catechism?
I've read chunks of it, I haven't read all of it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
I should though. I need to go finish it.
Mm-hmm.
And like I've read like the shorter Westminster Catechism. I haven't read the whole thing yet.
Yeah.
I need to. I think I'm finishing the 1689.
Okay.
And so I think one of the things that a lot of people who don't probably understand history well know, they don't understand that the Westminster Confession, the 1689, were intended to show unity, not division.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the misunderstandings that people have about theology is that theology is intended to build walls and to create barriers and create division.
Yeah.
When I don't know, it's a shame that so many people think that. Mm-hmm. Which means that some of our leaders haven't probably done a good job at times. Yeah. But like theology is the study of God, and if the building up of our theology cannot, there's a place for barriers. I want to make that clear. Mm-hmm. There's a place for barriers. I think we made that clear earlier. But like the study of God should not build up a whole lot of walls with other believers. But we should be able to find unity in a lot of things. Yeah. And I think like the 1689 Baptist Confession and the Westminster were written to show the unity within the Reformed people of that time.
Okay.
And like,
yeah, I have not read 1689. Here's one thing that I will say about Westminster is that it's clearly written as a differentiation between Protestant theology and Catholic theology.
Yeah.
And one of the things that people today struggle with that is that unless you're in a very particular context, that is not the struggle that you're dealing with.
Yeah.
Your struggle is secularism versus Christianity. And so that context is really important, and theology is always written in a context. Like even Augustine, who I really love as a 5th century author, had the context of the Roman Empire that he's writing in. And so he isn't devoid of that. So like we can kind of struggle when we walk into Westminster, and there are parts of it where there's the assumption that by being a part of a community, you're a part of that church, because something akin to like the parish system was at play in Great Britain at that time. That's no longer the case.
Yeah.
I don't know how many of your neighbors attend church. Very few of mine do.
Yeah.
And we're in San Antonio, Texas. And so like, we're not in like the Northeast where like my wife's family are. And so, so that assumption is very hard. And so, I mean, that's even something that like, there's the new city catechism that, doesn't have as much of that like Catholic versus Protestant like underbelly to it. And there's some other things that have been written that are really trying to show like the goodness and the beauty of Jesus in light of a secular context. So yeah.
So I haven't read the new city catechism. Mm-hmm. I'm assuming I should.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
It sounds like you have.
Yeah, and my kids go through it every Sunday as well.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's 52 weeks, so it's so you can do one a week and get it in a year.
Cool.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So you said earlier that we were too harsh when we talked about the Asbury revival.
Mm-hmm.
Why is that?
Too critical is what I said. I didn't say harsh. Words matter, right, John?
I do.
Yeah. So, and the reason that I say that is that I can often be critical, and I think that again am speaking to my own like disposition towards things where, you know, from the outside you're hearing like there's this pouring of the Holy Spirit happening. Yeah, I think there's a couple of things that I would say, and it's not in response to like any of the content that you guys said. I thought that was good. One is that, as far as I know, the only people that have been critical of the Asbury Confession are other Christians.
Asbury what?
The Asbury. Edit that out. The Asbury revival, as it's being known, are Christians, and I think that in America we have a tendency to like bite each other.
That's fair.
And I have been in so many contexts where it feels like Christians are the ones that are at each other constantly.
Yeah.
A second one that just happened is, you know, there were I think a couple of like Super Bowl spots for the He Gets Us campaign. I don't know the content of it. I've watched some of the commercials. I don't fully agree with it. One of my responses to that is I'm really grateful that they were there and not Pornhub. And so there's a sense where like, you know, Jesus is being talked about. And I actually also, like, without even knowing that, and I had that comment elsewhere, that like I have a friend who's part of a church in Missouri who helps sponsor He Gets Us, and then the He Gets Us people, whoever they are, actually like push people from his part of Missouri like his way to his church. And so it's an entity in and of itself, but it really wants to try to get people who are curious about Jesus into churches. And I wasn't aware of that until he had said something about it. So, you know, there are these two things that are happening right now that in some way it's like God is somehow moving through those things. And I don't fully understand it. And I'm probably not going to participate in it, but like, I just kind of want to be open to the potential of like God working and God moving through that. So I think that was kind of my posture toward it. And my hope that it would be, you know, that God would be at work there.
Yeah.
So
that's weird.
Yeah.
So like,
does that make sense?
No.
Do you have any questions about that?
So after we started talking, I remember you and I had a very brief exchange on Facebook about the whole He Gets Us thing. And so my mental note was, I was going to ask you about that also.
Okay.
But since we're talking about the whole, like the Asbury revival thing, I think I mentioned it earlier that I tend to be like, I'm skeptical of almost all things.
Yeah.
And so like, I am skeptical about the event. But in my skepticism, I try to be hopeful at the same time.
Yeah.
And one of my deals is like, I don't think we should call it a revival because we don't know yet.
Okay.
And it's like, we don't know because we won't be able to witness a lot of the fruits till years down the road.
Sure.
And so like, that's part of my deal.
Okay.
Is like, I don't think like during the first Great Awakening, they're like, there's a Great Awakening happening right now. But it's like, we saw the fruit from that later on down the road. Yeah. And a lot of great things came out of that. And so like, I'm skeptical because of like the school's affiliations within theology and that kind of thing. Like the traditions they're affiliated with, have a lot of like what we probably call heresy. Like, I think like that school's affiliated with like the holiness, and that part of their doctrine is ascetic perfectionism, and like that kind of like, I'm not okay with that. Yeah, I don't think you probably are either.
No.
And so that kind of was like, well, I'm not sure about that. I don't think they were honest about how they said it was fully organic, because we learned that there was a mass email that went out that told students to go there, and the thing happened. So that kind of bothered me because it wasn't. I don't think that was kind of like it wasn't a scheduled event, but after like a handful of students stayed and prayed and sang songs, the president was like, hey, there's students here doing that. Y'all should go be part of that. And then the thing took off. Yeah. And so that kind of felt like a political thing. Like, politicians are really good about telling the truth and lying at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
I kind of like got that vibe from this. And so like part of my deal is I don't see like when I look at scripture, I don't see like, especially like when you look at like the New Testament, the missionary journeys of the apostles, they're not trying to start revivals. But in the U.S., within like a lot of our Christian subcultures, church subcultures, there's this desire to always like, how can we create a new revival and that kind of thing, which I think kind of comes from Charles Finney. And like we mentioned Charles Finney a lot in previous episodes. And so like, I'm not really cool with Charles Finney and his practices and
former Presbyterian,
right?
As well.
Former, he was removed, right? For good reason. And like I see a lot of his practices in this, and that bothers me.
Sure.
Now, like God is sovereign, we both believe that. God works miracles. During all sorts of situations, and like, but like, there's a lot of times where God works a miracle. But just because God worked a miracle in that event doesn't mean we should make that event a practice. One of my favorites is, and not that I'm saying that Asbury is equal to this, but like I've heard testimonies of dudes waking up after a night with hookers and cocaine and they just wake up bawling and like God saves them. That doesn't mean we need to go start that ministry.
Correct. Yeah.
Not that I'm saying this is equal to that. But like there's so like I'm just like, let's wait before we deem this thing. Let's wait to later down the road and see like what is the fruit from this. The
timing. I do want to interject this. I think the timing of this is really interesting because the Methodist Church is going through a very, very slow break. The United Methodist Church is going through an insanely slow break. I have no idea why, and I'm not sure how closely you follow this or people listening on, but like
moderately, I think.
But the African church in many ways like saved the United Methodist Church from going toward like just complete unorthodoxy. Let's just put it that way. And you know, it's like it's really interesting even thinking of like the sinless perfectionism and like Wesleyan theology, because John Wesley like wrote most of the hymns that Presbyterians sing. And so his theology wasn't like just completely like off. But I do think they're like, and I don't like, out of God's mercy, I think he like preserved a lot of like really beautiful stuff in Africa and other places within the Methodist Church. And I had a great grandfather who was a Methodist circuit rider as well. And so there's like the Methodist Church like isn't just this completely heretical out there group of people. And so like here is this like very, very long break that's happened. And then Asbury is like the seminary where most, or like a large portion of Methodist and also Episcopalian, I'm not sure if you knew that, people are trained up. And so, I like it's just very interesting, like why God would choose now, and what, you know, if it isn't a true revival, it would actually be like a very, very sad thing, I think.
That would be sad, man. Yeah.
It would be a very, very sad thing if it was like artificial and produced. I think that one of the concerns that I have, especially being a campus minister right now during this revival, is that now there are whispers all around, UTSA included, of like, okay, how can we do this here?
So that's not a good thing to me.
Yeah, because that's where I think that you do start seeing artificial revivals.
And we see that happening a lot right now, right?
Yep.
There's like all these college campuses that all of a sudden revival is starting on college campuses and some other different organization type things. And I see that and I'm just like, I'm skeptical, man. Like I have a hard time celebrating those things. Yeah. And I think that's kind of what you're getting at also.
Yeah. And I think that the hope is that, and this is kind of like where my practice lies here, is like, I want to continue to pray and encourage and, you know, cheerlead on the ministries and the people who are doing good work on the campus. But I don't want to play as though like we're all just going to like huddle together and do this big prayer meeting, and that they're like there's going to be something that happens identical to what had happened there and in other places. And I think one of the fears of that is that, well, if it doesn't happen here, then what's wrong with San Antonio? What's wrong with UTSA? And I think what's really going to happen is like ministers will say, what's wrong with me? And they're going to burn out and they're going to be frustrated and they're going to be sad. And that is like the last thing that ministers and campus ministries need right now, because like there's about to be, and there's coming and already is a little bit of like a minister crisis in terms of like the number of people who are actively doing ministry in churches and on campus. And it's just going to continue to get worse. And so that's one side of the story that I've heard from people who are critical of this on the revival side, is they're like, this is going to be really hard for people that don't feel that internal thing and don't experience what's happening in Asbury. So I just gave you both sides of the
See, and I haven't thought about it from the perspective of like the college ministers.
Yeah.
So like that's unfortunate. That's not, I can see that being a problem, like you're saying.
Yeah.
One of the things, and I mentioned this before, is that kind of, because like I look at it like as a okay, the culture of the church in the United States, and like I look at the Asbury revival thing, and I see like there's an issue like within like the church culture in the U.S. because like I see that like this tells us, like, to me this tells us something about the way we understand faith and the way we understand God and the Holy Spirit especially. Like it has to be an event like that for me to truly experience the presence of God. And I have to go to Asbury to truly experience God, and especially the Holy Spirit.
Right.
When because the Holy Spirit is present there. I don't want to say if the Holy Spirit is present there, because the Spirit is present. But like, it's not no more present there than it is like right here on this patio, or down the road, or at the church that you attend, or the church that I attend, that I'm a part of. Yeah. But there's this really bad understanding of God where it's like it has to be it's at that place, and I need to go there so I can hear from God. Yeah. That's a problem. Yeah. And like, what's wrong with me? Kind of like what you're saying. What's wrong with my ministry? Because the Spirit isn't present here, but it's present there. Yeah. Which it's not true, man. Like, right. Y'all have like however many students y'all have, and God is doing a great miraculous work there. Yeah. We don't need to be jealous of that. We don't need to seek that, because God is doing what He's going to do right here, and He already is doing it. Yep. And that's part of like my I guess if it's a criticism, I guess critique, whatever you want to call it. Yeah. Is that right there? It's like people need to understand that God is present, God is moving during what you would perceive as your boring, regular, everyday life. Yeah. He's with you in the car, He's with you in your house, He's with you at your church. He's he's always there. He's not doesn't fail to be there just because there's not millions of people watching your life. You should be thankful that millions of people are not watching and dissecting your life. Right. Yeah. No, that's true. That's a good word. And like, we have celebrity culture in America, and we also love, oh my gosh, there's this quote. I used to use it all the time. From Nike Town in Chicago, Illinois. There was this quote from like 2008 that has always stuck in my mind. And it said, Europe has its cathedrals, and that's what, that's its cityscape. In America, we have our stadiums. And I thought, yes, that's our places of worship. Yeah. Now, in Europe, obviously, many of those cathedrals are relics now, and they're museums, and they're places of seeing good art and things like that. But I think that's really at the heart of what a lot of people think that we need. And there's always one of the unique things about being a campus minister is that you have to be. I'll just say you have to be wise with certain things. So there's every single year when I was at University of Central Florida, 80,000 students, there would be this push to get one big event where all of the ministries, there were like 40 of us together, to do this one big, gigantic worship, set together. And the thought was, we're going to pour all this money in, and we're going to see thousands of students come and hear the gospel of Jesus. And my critique of it was,
but what if they don't? And could we actually like spread out around the campus and like get to know students on their own terms instead of having to invite them into this entertainment? And then you have this sense where there's usually like one ministry or one group who gets to like lead it. And so it's their like theology, but also their understanding of like what to do, their music, all that stuff. And so we don't get to appreciate the variety of the church. And I would say this all the time, that in a city of 70,000 people, so my friend lives in Burlington, Vermont, you would expect 40 churches, or more, probably more in Texas. And, you know, why not expect 40 ministries to function on their own? We don't just want to like bring one church together to have this huge presence in the city. And so I'm hearing a lot more. I bring that up because I'm hearing a lot more of that now, of like, we just need to have like one big prayer gathering. We need to have one big worship thing together in the gym, or, you know, somewhere substantial. And, you know, it's all about like, the idea is if they see us worshiping together, people will flock to it. And I'm skeptical of that.
Yeah, man, I would be too. But like what's funny is it seems like sometimes the things that aren't inherently bad can seem like they do a lot of like damage.
Yeah.
There's nothing
That's a great way to put it. That is a great way to put it. Yeah.
About thousands of college students or ministries worshiping together. That's actually an awesome thing.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with thousands of people hopefully hearing the gospel together, worshiping together, praying together, like not just as a big group, but meeting new people and sharing life together and then praying in groups together. Like those are all good, really great things. But like, I remember when I was in college, we would always go to big conferences. And like when you're in that moment, first of all, when you're in that moment, you're not in real life.
Yeah.
You're getting a glimpse of something that will soon, you're getting a very tiny glimpse of the future. Yeah. But you're not living in real life. And when you're at those events or those conferences, like everything's different. Like you feel different. And I think that's part of the problem. But like you leave, like they say, like you leave on fire. That's always the way. It's always on fire. You go back to real life, and then you slowly go back to the person you were before you went to the event or that conference. And I remember having that conversation with my friends in college. Like, man, like okay, we're going to this conference, and last year we talked about like how it was great there, but we went back to regular life and we kind of fell back into bad habits and all that kind of stuff. How do we change that this time? And we never did. Yeah. And so like you end up this culture where you're always chasing excitement. You're always chasing that next event, that next conference. And that's not like the life of a Christian. That wasn't the life of the apostles. It was the life of the first church. That's never been like our life. Yeah. But like we built this culture where we're chasing like this extraordinary feeling. And like I think that's part of the reasons I'm skeptical about like Asbury, and that's why I'm skeptical about these things. Like all those things aren't inherently bad, but they tend to do long damage because people are like, well, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with my life? What am I doing wrong? And like, I mean, like this life is a struggle. Yeah, it is. It's a battle between like you're battling your flesh like all the time. But that's why it's important to be like with your regular, ordinary, local body of people where you get together, you're fighting a lot of, not the exact same thing, but similar things. You come together, you pray, you worship, you dig into the word, and you also just like enjoy life together. Yeah.
One of the things that I wanted to say too is like, yes, everything you said. One thing that I've really tried to encourage my students is, first of all, I never want them to say anything critical about another ministry, ever. Because I like, if you're a Christian ministry on campus, like my hope and really like, I think it's true, is that they're proclaiming the good news of Jesus. Yeah. And because I feel that way about like, you know, the other things that we talked about, like I don't feel like we need to have like a negative, you know, posture towards them, but actually to have like friendships with people who are Christians of other denominations. I'm kind of hoping we're modeling that here in having this conversation. And I feel like this podcast has done a good job of modeling that and saying like, you can have friendships outside of your church, outside of your circle, outside of your book club, outside of people that believe the same things. And so that's something that I try to model and like getting to know BSM director, the Chi Alpha folks, the, crew campus minister, different people that are doing ministry around the city as well. And that stuff is important because like we do believe that we are going to the new heavens, new earth together, And so if we believe that like everybody has already read the Westminster Confession of Faith, like we're going to be sorely disappointed.
Yeah. Definitely.
And if we believe that everyone is literate, we're going to be disappointed. And so anyway, that's a hope that I have for students. And because like, I really do want them to just appreciate Christians. I want them to know Christians. I want them to be able to like have iron sharpens iron conversations and not just with like people that believe like the same exact stuff that they do.
Yeah. So on that note, I think there's something, there's wisdom in that. Is it possible to not be critical of other ministries and events taking place, while at the same time trying to teach people to test the spirits and to look for the fruit?
Oh, yeah. So,
you know what I'm saying?
Yeah. So to clarify what I was saying, I think I'm kind of like trying to get a balance of being critical of something like a big worship service, but also saying like let's befriend people that are involved with that. Let's befriend the folks who are on campus that are doing things. And yeah, if there is something that needs to be, critiqued, sure, like critique it for sure. Yeah, I don't know if that helps.
No, it doesn't, because I know I'm still new to the area.
Because I don't believe in blind, just, hey, we're okay with everybody. I love everybody. And that's actually the reason why I brought up the word ecumenical, because typically what ecumenical means is I don't care what anyone else believes. I just want to get along with everybody.
Yeah, that tends to be that. That's not good.
And that is, that's an excuse for people just to do whatever they want and actually to not care about each other. I'm actually like, I kind of want to like reawaken the word so that actually means what it really means, which is like loving and appreciating and valuing each other, but then also like not signing off on everything that they believe.
Yeah. Because like, hey man, you were, cause you mentioned the Asbury thing and you're like, you thought we were a little, what was the word again?
Critical, I think. I think you said harsh first.
Yeah. And so one of my concerns was like, I'm friends with a lot of pastors and ministers on Facebook, and instantaneously they were all like signing off on it. Instantaneously, they knew nothing about it, just what they saw in the headline. Yeah. And they're like, oh wow, this is great. And they're all like copying and pasting the same photo they saw from the same article. And like they were just saying, yes, I affirm this. And my thought was like, I don't think we need to affirm it, but I also don't think we need to instantaneously hate it. Yeah. But I was like, as a shepherd, I feel pretty confident that this is an opportunity as a shepherd to teach your people how to, hey, let's test the spirit. Let's test the spirits. Let's look for the fruits, and then maybe we can sign off on it later. And I thought that was, I think that's such a better way to address that. Yeah. And not just that, but other things as well. Yeah.
I don't know why we need to sign off on it. I think that's where I stand. It's like, and with the he gets us too. It's like, and I got in a lot of trouble with some friends and with some other pastors because I was, 10 years ago was signing off good or bad on everything. and wanting to make like cultural critiques and wanting to say things. And I just had a pastor pull me aside and be like, why do you care about this one thing happening in Oregon or whatever, and so like I think that we can just kind of sit in it, and if someone has a question about it, then like test the spirit like individually. But I mean, my students weren't even aware of it until Monday.
Yeah.
Like they were completely clueless. And I think that that's a lot of people, except people who are like really active on Facebook, because
Facebook, culture warriors. And
that kind of thing,
and I tend to get caught up in that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you're not alone. I mean, I went to a wedding this weekend, and there were a lot of people who were very churchy talking about it. And I just had to remember.
They're not celebrating the relationship.
and I just had to remember, like, oh yeah, this is a really important thing for people who are like, in those circles. And I mean, like, there's a conversation we could have about like social media, in regards to that there is an algorithm that is like that's feeding me based on like the preferences that I'm liking, that I'm like going towards. And so there's even like manipulation in that.
There is. And I wish we cared more about that. We should do a conversation about that sometime. Because I make money off of some of that. The He Gets Us thing was kind of interesting. Because like I watched the Super Bowl, at least the second half of it, and I saw the commercial.
Great game, by the way. I think we should sign off on the game.
It ended up being it was a great game. We thought it was going to be, the first half looked kind of iffy, but the second half was different. It's like I saw the commercial and I was like, well, I mean, like, Scripture does teach us in a way that Christ does get us. Mm-hmm. He understands the temptation we deal with. He understands what it's like to live in a broken world and to do ministry. Like, he gets that. Mm-hmm. He was tempted. He knows we're tempted. He understands that. He understands the struggle and those kind of things. I'm like, in a sense, he does. I think Hebrews teaches us that. Mm-hmm. But I was like, I wonder if that's what they mean when they say that. And so like I posted on Facebook. I was like, hey, so everybody's in an uproar about this. But I was like, I don't know if anybody's done any research to be in an uproar about this. So why is everybody upset about this? And I posted on Facebook and got a lot of information. Like, when you go to their website, one of the things that they have on their website is that, like, it seems like they don't use theological terminology, but they basically use terminology that, like, hey, your repentance doesn't matter. Your sanctification doesn't matter. None of that's important. Mm-hmm. Like, God loves you just as you are, and you don't need to change. You don't need to grow or anything like that. Mm-hmm. And I was like, well, that's not cool, mm-hmm. right? But I was like, I don't think most of the people who are upset about this actually went and dug around. Mm-hmm. And I don't think the non-Christians who heard that message went and dug around on their websites. Maybe I'm naive. Maybe everybody's not as lazy as I think they are. Mm-hmm. But like, and then a lot of people were upset that they talked about refugees on the website, and that's a conversation for another time. Because there's a lot of confusion about what refugee means, and all that kind of stuff. And then there's some kind of a political agenda behind that for some people. Mm-hmm. But I was like, I think that what you can do, this is what I've tried to do in the past, is like, I can take He Gets Us, mm-hmm. and I can teach what the Scripture says about He Gets Us, and build off of that. Mm-hmm. Because what I understand the Scriptures to mean is not what these people are talking about. Mm. And then there's a lot of concern about the organizations that back the message and all that other kind of stuff. But like, man, it didn't take people 60 seconds to start complaining about it. And like, I don't know if like I don't think that's necessarily healthy either. Right. Because you also, who are upset about this, you need to go, look, like, let's test the spirits, let's, like, and that kind of thing. You need to go, like, before you get upset about something, like, go figure out why you're upset about something. Mm-hmm. And so I think the fault tends to usually land on what we call the both sides kind of thing. But like, kind of like what you were saying is like, well, the people that you're ministering to, do they even know that exists? And so probably not. And so, yeah, I don't know enough to speak on the He Gets Us stuff. I was very surprised to see it as a commercial.
I've been surprised in seeing it. And I think, what one of the things that I think it's trying to highlight, that I can affirm, is the nearness of God. Yeah. And that Jesus was a real human being and was a real human who experienced pain and experienced, challenges and experienced like hardship, and knows what it's like. Like in one, I'm thinking of like one scene in one of those commercials where there are people like fighting each other who, as you look at them, you can tell that they're from different political strands. And, my interpretation of that is that he gets both of them. And like, that's actually a pretty loud message. And unfortunately, I don't think that a lot of churches say that.
Yeah.
And I don't think that secular people, and I'm using that in a very broad sense, but people that just aren't exposed to Christianity and aren't exposed to religion at all, do not know that. And so my hope would actually be to like help them see that and understand like the nearness of Jesus, like in the presence of your pain and your sorrow and, your humanity. And that he also like was human himself, and that he wasn't an activist, you know what I'm saying? So, anyway, it's an interesting, we could probably have a whole other show about that. So you're gonna have to cut a ton of this. I don't know where you're gonna start.
That's somebody else's job.
There you go.
So did you want to share a little bit more about RUF, man?
Yeah, I had spent no time sharing about RUF. Right. So
because like I know a lot of like college ministry friends I know have never heard of it.
Yeah. So RUF stands for Reformed University Fellowship. It's kind of a mouthful. So I actually don't mind it when people on campus call it RUF because it's sometimes more to even say the acronym than just to say RUF. It is the ministry of the PCA, Presbyterian Church in America. I think the reason that a lot of people haven't heard of it is that it had like very small beginnings. Like, in 2000, I think we only had 40 ministries nationwide, and now we have 180. Oh. And so there's been a lot of expansion, a lot of growth that's happened in RUF, which has been really cool. I think that it's a really unique ministry because it's not like I do my fundraising for this ministry, but also churches in the PCA help fund it. And so cool. I'm not just tied to one particular church or, one particular like presbytery as our like, group of churches. But then there's just a ton of freedom that I have on campus to be able to, move within like different circles of people. And so there's not this like, direct magnetism between like PCA church kids and RUF. Although that's cool when it happens. And in fact, at UTSA, there's so few PCA students that end up going there that I just have to go and meet other people. So, so RUF, we actually turned 50 this year, which our denomination does too.
Oh, so it's been around that long?
Yeah. So it's been around for a long time. It was mostly in like South Carolina and Mississippi from the beginning. And so very humble beginnings. And then like around 2000 just started growing a lot more and expanding, all over the place. So we actually have a number of ministries, I think 14 ministries in the state of Texas. So
you said 14?
Yeah, 14. Yeah. Which is the most of any state. But I know there's probably 100 BSM ministries in Texas. And I think too, like, man, I just recognize like how small I am and how small RUF is in the scope of everything. But I love the ministry because, again, there's a lot of freedom. There's a lot of one of the things that we really want to emphasize is like being pastoral with students. And, that's kind of a thin line because in being pastoral, you don't want to like tell them that you're the church, or that like
Yeah.
your organization is the church. And so we constantly push people to the church. And so that's one of the like presuppositions that we have in our philosophy of ministry, is that we're not the church, and we want students to know the church, and we want to also value and respect. And so again, my family and I attend a local PCA church because that's part of what we believe is important. And a number of our students go to the PCA church, but there's not a requirement to go to the PCA church. But yeah, I mean, the way that the RUF ministry functions at UT is very different than here. University of Texas, I should have clarified that. At Austin, RUF is much larger. They would have a large group of a couple hundred students. They have small groups set up, a lot of student leaders that are leading those. We're very small. We don't have a large group meeting. We have Bible studies. I lead a lot of them, in part because I essentially have like one guy who is really equipped to be able to lead. Our hope is to be able to have student leaders, but I also love it, man. I love teaching people the Bible. And so we're at UTSA, but then I also go to a community college called Northwest Vista and lead Bible studies and connect with students. So a friend of mine, a good friend of mine in Florida, says that I'm a cowboy because I like these kind of like strange ministries, and I'm kind of like in a frontier type ministry where there's just, I'm having to kind of make it up on the fly. So
nice, man.
Yeah.
And like you started during like the whole COVID pandemic thing, right?
Yep. We moved here June 2020. It was awesome for like remodeling a house and moving into a neighborhood, because we quickly got to know a lot of people. It was not great for ministry.
Yeah.
Our campus was completely shut down for an entire school year, and was partially shut down for another school year. And so this is my third year officially on staff with RUF at UTSA, but my first year of getting like a typical year on campus.
So when they called you a cowboy, which is hilarious, they're saying like you like to. Is it like one of those things where it's kind of like, that looks undesirable, I'll go do that?
It has a very expansive meaning, but it's I think that it's similar to that, as well as like maybe more like frontiersmen who can kind of see the potential in something and somewhere. So that might actually be more of the accurate thing of like, hey, that place is somewhere where people would not want to go, but I can see that it would be great. And we love San Antonio. We're like, my wife and I have kind of fallen in love with this place. So
awesome.
Yeah, it's been great.
So like, what is it you would like for people to know about the importance of college ministry?
Oh my gosh. How much more time do we have left, John? Like, this is...
I did an episode that took 2 hours.
Gosh.
Because it's got a soft spot in my heart.
Yeah. Okay. So college... So I have a lot of conversations with people who are like, donors, or who like really have like a strong investment in this ministry and in ministries that I've been a part of, who have a lot of anxiety about college and about college students. And I use that term not necessarily clinically, but just like they feel like we have to have humongous ministries in order for like Christianity to continue. And they don't know, they don't essentially believe that like the gates of hell shall not overcome the church. And that's like, so when I say how important it is, I want to clarify that like I believe that the gates of hell will not overcome. God's kingdom and God's church.
Absolutely.
But it's such a crucial time in a person's life. I'll be 40 later this year. And when I was 25, I thought like I remember having this conversation with my wife. I can't imagine being in my 30s doing campus ministry. I can't imagine not doing campus ministry through my 40s.
Yeah.
Because I just love students, and I love the things that students go through during that crucial time of their life. At the same time, like, you know, I know that I'm not the Christ, to repeat like the words of John the Baptist. And like when my time's up to serve on the college campus. But I love it so much. And I think that it really takes, it takes a unique person to lead a church. It takes a unique person to plant a church. I can't imagine how you did that. And I think it really takes a unique person to be able to deal with a college campus, because when you walk on a place where you see people living like trashy and sinful and destructive lives, like it can be really depressing. Trashy is probably not the right word, but you know, just living in ways that are so contrary to what is typical and what is like helpful for like just a person, like how a person should live. I'm being very broad on purpose. And so it can be like really like emotionally taxing being there, because like even your person who would walk in and say, I want to be involved with the campus ministry, and they like get involved and they're plugged in, and you just like, once you get to know someone's life, you just begin to see things that are just really despicable.
Yeah.
And there are very few exceptions of that in my years of campus ministry. And it's hard to hold that if you do believe that you're ultimately like doing something to save them. I think that what's kept me doing this is that I like have to cling to Jesus, and I have to believe that like it's Christ alone that does this work. And it's Christ alone that I'm like even here today, you know, in San Antonio, proclaiming the good news of him. So yeah, I don't know. That was the most rabbit trailed answer that I've given today, and I've given a lot of them. So, yeah, but it's a very important place. Definitely pray for, and I would also say this, like, man, pray broadly for campus ministries, because like the student that connects with another ministry, like I'm just glad that they're there. As you know, so long as they're preaching the gospel, all that, blah, blah, blah. But, yeah, but there are just unseen, like evil presences on college campuses. The apathy, for one, is just enormous.
There's, something interesting, I guess, about, cause you're talking about like seeing people live like sinful, destructive lives. And like, I think in some traditions, we make it clear that you're sinning against God, but we don't make it clear that your sins against God are also against yourself.
Yeah.
And against the people around you who you affect as well.
Yeah.
And sin is so much more destructive than you or I or Calvin could probably articulate in the most pristine ways.
Yeah.
And like, it is not out of a form of self-righteousness, but it is painful, man, to watch people who you love and care about more than that person realizes just tear themselves up, man.
Yeah.
And like, because they're sinning against God, and they're hurting themselves and those around them, which includes you, because you have to see it. Mm-hmm. And like, especially when like you pray for them and like, you're like, man, this is something, you're praying for them, like nothing's changing. You're talking to them, you're teaching them, nothing's changing.
Yep.
And like, you're just loving them, and you're just gonna like, it's like, stop it. Mm-hmm. And just like, it's rough, man. Mm-hmm. It's rough, especially like when it's somebody that's young and is not as mature as they probably think that they are. They don't know as much as they think that they are, and you and I don't know as much as we think that we do.
Right.
Like it's when we talk about like, well, the Bible says love people. It's not this soft, fluffy thing that a lot of people like to call it. Like loving people it's work, man.
Yeah.
And it costs something, and it costs a lot actually. It costs it costs your time, it costs your emotions, it costs you money, it costs you like all sorts, man. Mm-hmm. But because God has given us this heart that we didn't really ask for, and if we did ask for it, we didn't know what we were asking for. Like here we are. Like it's like it's something. Mm-hmm. It's something, man, for sure. But like I mean, but it's important. Like it's really important, man. They're people who are college age traditionally. Mm-hmm. They've got freedom they've never had before.
Yeah.
Most people, despite what media headlines tell you, most people who are in college want to learn. They're trying to figure out who they are. They're trying to build a life.
Yeah.
They're exploring for better and worse. Mm-hmm. And like they're just like they're here at this place, and you know they're going to be there, and they're just like they're waiting, but at the same time they're trying to get something. Yep. And like it's a precious time in life, man. It is. And why Christians and churches and denominations would not choose to invest in that is mind-boggling. Yeah. And like fortunately, RUF and rough like has got the presence that it does have, man. And fortunately, we do have college ministers. Mm-hmm. But like I don't think a lot of Christians understand how important and significant like that ministry is.
Yeah. I mean, here's an example that I just thought of. I had a meeting with a guy who is running a Christian camp in New Mexico, and he went to a university that I'd randomly heard of in Maine, small, maybe 1,500 students. And he said, yeah, we started up a Christian ministry on campus. And I was like, wow, how many students were there? 2.
Yeah, that was my life.
2 students. And that's not a critique of this guy. That's just, that's honestly why. I mean, like we need to have ministries that have like 5, 6, 7 students involved and ministers that are there, because like without that, there will be a vacuum. Yeah. There will not be Christians on college campuses if you don't have college ministers that are there. And, you know, I mean, there are so many people who I talk to that are like, why can't you get 100 people together at UTSA? And I'll say, well, it's the Lord's work, but also it's actually much more difficult than you would imagine to get people to care about anything.
Why don't you come down for 2 or 3 days, walk alongside me, and like we can do this together for a couple of days? Yeah. I brought my sister-in-law along for one day to kind of see what happens like at Northwest Vistas Community College. And after doing tabling for 4 hours and then doing a Bible study, she was like, that was the most exhausting day I've ever had in my life. And she's a counselor. Like she deals with people's problems all day. She's like, I do not know how you do that all the time. But yeah, anyway, I'm not trying to toot my horn at all. It's just a different kind. And I love, again, I think that there is like a good amount of like humility, like in our institution as RUF, because I heard one of the best descriptions of like, you know, the difference between like a church planter and a senior pastor and an assistant pastor and then like a campus minister. And it's a different like workout style. And so if you like doing high intensity interval training type workouts, you know, that you, if that's how you like to work, if that's how you like your work life to be, then you're actually a great fit for an RUF type thing, because it is like high intensity workouts all the time. If you love consistency and you're a marathon runner was the description, you'd be a great senior pastor, because you just kind of deal with like things in the long term, and you know that there's going to be challenges along the way, but like you're trucking for a long time and you're preaching every week. And I'm definitely more of a high intensity interval training guy. I can deal with, you know, the high intensity stuff, but I love having like my summers
and not having to work constantly during that time. So, and getting breaks during Christmas vacation and, all that.
So there's that, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
So like you're working with a Gen Z, right?
Mm-hmm.
What is it that people don't know about Gen Z that they probably should know about?
I think Gen Z is honest. They're honest about how confused they are, but they don't know what to do with it. So from a Christian perspective, it's actually a great window into the potential that's there for like students to actually like understand their need for something and to have it filled in Jesus rather than in other things. I think what is so hard for them is that they are accustomed to being bubbled, and I'm speaking it specifically in like social media terms, but also like they're just accustomed to being in some kind of like comfortable type setting, and so to get them out of a comfortable setting is difficult. I mean, for instance, you can like even racially divide out the like type of medical organizations that are at UTSA. There's not just like the pre-med, group. There is, potentially like a Hispanic pre-med group. And so like that I think is just a picture of like how comfortable we can be in a particular work. That's one example of how like Gen Z is being divided out. I don't think it's necessarily their fault either. And so it's hard for people to move outside of that and to even say something like, it would be good for me to be in a church with a multi-generation of people, because they would probably say I need to be racially and age-wise with a group of people who would understand me and to be able to speak my language in an appropriate way. Not understanding that there's goodness in being outside of that, and that bubble is, to use a Gen Z terminology, is more toxic than being in a multi-generational, setting in a church where you can, if you're allowed to have freedom, you can have freedom to talk about things and to not just, be triggered by one another.
That's also Gen Z terminology.
Yes, I know.
I would think that everybody would, it may not be comfortable, but it'd be better for everybody to be in something that would be like multi-generational or that kind of thing that you're talking about. I would argue that's probably best for everybody. Yeah. Like to be around people that are not just like you.
Yeah.
Maybe more comfortable for some people in the beginning.
Yeah.
But like that would seem like the ideal.
Yeah. And I'm an older millennial. I will say that when I think about a boomer, I think about a meme, and it like scares me to like want to be in their presence.
Yeah.
And I also think of like just experiences with family that haven't been pleasant.
Yeah.
What's been great about being in the PCA is that I'm around a lot of boomers whenever I'm at Presbytery. And so my job is actually not to be a separatist that's just on campus, but it actually is to be like friends with people who are much older than me.
Yeah.
And so I have to do that.
You don't have a choice.
Yeah. I actually could choose not to go to my Presbyterian meetings, but it wouldn't be the best for me, Yeah.
That's fine.
Mm-hmm.
This is the last one. What is the misconception that everybody has about Gen Z?
Misconception everyone has about Gen Z. Man, that's hard.
There's not just one.
Yeah. I think one would be that they're that's a hard question, because I think that when I think of Gen Z, I also think of like the earlier students that I had and just how difficult it's been for them to keep jobs. And in the sense of like, they just get unhappy and they switch within like 6 months or a year.
Oh, gotcha.
And that's a critique that a lot of like boomers have about like, you know, millennials, but then also Gen Z.
Yeah.
So yeah. Okay. What's the question again?
What is, I said the misconception, but we can go just A.
Yeah.
What is the misconception that everybody has about Gen Z?
Yeah, I think that, so I'm gonna speak from a Christian standpoint so I can narrow it down in my head. I think that Christians make too much of like Barna research and to see how unreligious, and they just assume that like this is the generation that is going to hell, and that's going to need to be edited. But that there is a sense where like this is an impossible task for campus ministers or things like that. And I mean, it's a very secularized group of people, but it's also a group of people who have, like, I have hope for, because they've been exposed to a lot in terms of like beliefs, dogmas, like the secular creed being like shoved down their throat of like, this is what you need to believe. You need to believe that love is love. You need to believe that, that trans rights are human rights, that, those sorts of things. And I think that the peeling back of some of that stuff is going to be really interesting to see, like how Christians that come out of this generation like are able to relate to their neighbors. Whereas I think that they're like, even in like early millennial generation, like if you weren't in like cultural hotspots, you didn't have to be around people who lived different lifestyles. Who were trans, who were gay, things like that. And so there was an unfamiliarity to it. I now would be able to engage with a person that was trans that walked into our church. And I think that you're going to see a lot of students who have a lot of compassion for people in the same way that I think we see in the Good Samaritan parable. And so I think that's really hopeful.
No, that's good, man. That's fair. That's probably pretty spot on. Yeah. Nah, that one's got my mind going in circles. Appreciate it, man.
Yeah, thank you.
It's been good, man. It's been awesome. And for everybody else, thanks for joining us. If you enjoyed the conversation, like we said before, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, click the bell. If you've got any comments, please don't hesitate to put those in the comment section. If you have any questions, please share those as well. And until next time, may the Lord bless you and keep you. May the Lord make his face shine upon you and be gracious to you. And the Lord lift up his countenance upon you and give you peace. Amen.
And